Hello everyone, so this is going to be the weapons lecture to give you some ideas about what you might write about for Essay 2 if you chose to write about weapons. So this movie was released in August 2025, making it very recent. It was written and directed by Zach Cregger, this guy who apparently was a comedian before he started directing horror films. And his other well-known horror film is Barbarian, which interestingly enough is a bit similar to this movie because it has a monstrous female protagonist who is hidden inside of an unassuming house. So if you haven't seen Barbarian, you might consider watching that, especially for spooky season, because I just thought it was interesting that it seems to have parallels to weapons. In Barbarian, it also critiques the police force. It portrays cops as useless or incompetent or corrupt, which also carries over into weapons, which I think is significant. So Zach Cregger really does not like the cops, and we'll see more of that as we go on, and we'll see that he also has critiques for other institutions in our society as well. The last thing to note as part of the intro to this is I'm sure you noticed the movie uses a non-linear structure. We jump from character to character, and as we jump from character to character and get their perspective, our views of the characters shift, either more positively or more negatively. So, as if it's not all black and white. So, that said, let's keep going. Some context for weapons. I think the context is extremely important to understanding the message of this movie. It was released, as I said, in 2025, and I looked it up, and apparently we've had over 50 school shootings this year alone, and the year isn't even over yet. And you might be wondering why I decided to mention that, but I think it is relevant to what weapons is all about, especially considering that title. Socioculturally speaking, I think this film is engaged with a lot of things in our current culture, like thoughts and prayers culture, where people, instead of taking action in the face of tragedies, they will just say thoughts and prayers. Or think of the children, which is another thing people say, but are they really thinking of the children? Oftentimes, perhaps not. I think, going back to the title, it also might be about the weaponization of children to push political agendas. In other words, when tragedy befalls children, sometimes people don't think of the children. They think of, okay, how can I use this tragedy in order to push whatever political agenda I have? And the last thing is political conspiracy theories, which I think will come into play, especially about supposed threats against children that don't exist, and sometimes people will focus on those instead of focusing on real threats to children. So that's something else I think the movie is very much engaged with. Symbols. Alright, so I don't want to go too much into these because, of course, if you're in the online class, I have an assignment where there's a discussion board where you discuss the symbols. But I will briefly mention them, and they probably will come up later in the course of our discussion in this video anyway. But I think that floating AR-15 in Archer's dream above the house with the 217 on it, I think that very much signals that this movie is implicitly about gun violence. Aunt Gladys's tree, which she uses to control people, which is very ironic because trees, as we talked about with the Twilight Zone clip, usually represent nurturing, but she is not nurturing these kids, right? She is stealing their essences by means of the tree, which is, yeah, very dark and twisted. The name tags, I think this is important, and I'll just say this. Alex steals the kids' name tags as if he's erasing their identities. And I think that very much comports with what I was saying on the last slide about how kids are not really thought about when tragedy strikes. They might even get forgotten. People might not even know their names as they rail against the tragedy, allegedly on behalf of the children, whose names they might not even know. And then there is the Mickey Mouse shirt. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that, actually. But note that it's worn by the principal, Marcus, who wants Justine to stay away from the kids, and not talk to them. Or listen to them, for that matter. So keep that in mind, and I will talk about the shirt definitely later on. Now, actually, so let's talk about Marcus. He is the principal of the school. Fast fun fact, someone I went to high school with, Victor, he was the stunt double for Marcus, which I just thought was cool. So that's what this picture is. But anyway, Marcus is the principal, and like I said before, he wants Justine to keep her distance from the students because the town suspects her, and he doesn't want her talking to Alex. What he's more concerned about, the way I see it, is optics or the school not looking bad instead of caring about the students' well-being, because obviously the case isn't solved. Whatever caused them to disappear is still out there. I think it's notable that Marcus is gay. I actually looked at an early version of the script, and in that version he was married to a woman, so it looks like they changed it. And I think they might have included that detail for a reason. He is working in a school, and he's a gay man, and there is that notion that LGBTQ people might represent a threat to children, and I think that's where the Mickey Mouse shirt comes into play, as if he's some sort of groomer trying to lure in children with his Mickey Mouse shirt. But ironically, well, perhaps not ironically, it's a subversion. He is not the one who is a threat to the children. Gladys is, and he even says, stay away from the children, don't talk to the children, don't drive the children home, don't hug the children. He is the opposite of what might be expected if he were a groomer, so obviously he is not. So I think that detail about him being gay was intentional. But that said, he does get weaponized by Gladys, who is the actual threat to the children. Alright, so Gladys is the real threat, but it would seem that Marcus is, but he is not. He's just being used as a weapon. Speaking of people who represent institutions who are used as a weapon, let's talk about Paul. So Paul is reckless and corrupt, sort of in the same way that that Marcus is indifferent. Paul commits police brutality, which is very bad, when he punches James, and he tries to cover it up by letting James go. And of course, that just leads to disaster. That's what causes him to become weaponized also, because when he lets James go, James stumbles upon the house, and that leads him to the house. And as such, they both get got by Gladys. So yes, this is another example of institutional rot in Marcus's case, he represents a failed institution, which is the school. The school fails to protect the children. Gladys takes advantage of that and weaponizes him. The cops fail to protect or save the children, and Gladys weaponizes the cops. And I want to talk about James in a second, who also gets weaponized. But to stay on Paul, to further illustrate his corruption, he is married to the chief's daughter, who he doesn't want to be with. He does not want to be with Donna, but he's married to her, it would seem, to make sure he doesn't get in trouble when he does stuff like punch someone. Like, hey, chief, I'm married to your daughter. You can't go too hard on me. And that leads me to James, who I think is the picture of a young person who is failed by corrupt or inept institutions in society. He is a young drug addict living in a tent, estranged from his family, and he sort of continues this vicious cycle of institutional harm against young people. He's a thief. He steals from a kid. He had a kid's iPad and earphones that he was going to pawn, and that just shows he was failed, and as such, as a child, as a young person, he was failed by institutions, and as such, he continues to do harm to other young people, like that child that lost their possessions. He also might have AIDS, which, well, he doesn't know if he does, but the needle poking, that is also a result of him being failed, we can infer, by institutions. He is shunned by society, and he continues the cycle. He gives it to the corrupt cop, Paul, maybe, and Paul, in turn, gives it to Justine, because if you recall, they sleep together. So if he does have AIDS, he is spreading it everywhere, and that is a result of, the film seems to say, society failing him and institutions failing him. And I think we should also note that his drug addiction is sort of parallel to Justine's alcoholism. Justine is failed by the school, who aren't really supporting her in any meaningful way. They're just sort of telling her to stay away, even though she wants to work and have some normalcy in her life and talk to Alex and get some closure, etc. And the school does not do any of that. It just sort of continues to make her into a pariah. And so institutions cause her to fall into alcoholism. Institutions cause James to fall into drug addiction, because the police don't help him get out of his drug addiction. He doesn't punch. He gets punched by a cop. He's allowed to run free instead of the cop giving him help for his drug addiction and his thievery. So I think he definitely is the picture of someone failed by institutions. What the heck is with that 217, y'all? So I have a theory or two. The most obvious theory is that it is an allusion to The Shining, at least the book. In The Shining book, there is a room 217 that has a scary zombie woman in there, which could be an allusion to the fact that Gladys is also a scary monster woman, supernatural, etc. The other idea, I came up with this, and I saw it on Reddit also, but the only other prominent child character with a name besides Alex is Matthew, and that made me look up Matthew 2:17. Matthew 2:17 says, "Then what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, for they are no more." This is in reference to the Christmas story in Matthew, when King Herod kills all the male babies in Bethlehem. So, for they are no more, and the children vanish in this movie. So it could be an allusion to that verse. I'm not sure, but I'm interested to see what y'all think of 2:17 in the paper, if you choose to write about this part. But someone in one of the in-person classes said that 17 represents the number of children who went missing, and 2 represents the 2 people who were left, Justine and Alex. So it could be that as well. Let's talk about Gladys, our antagonist. So I know she looks rather creepy, but at the same time, she's just a sick elderly woman. So as such, she might be the least likely suspect in the kids' disappearances, because what can she do as a sick elderly woman? But she is a witch, or something like it. She definitely has powers, magic, or what have you. So Justine is not the witch, even though they wrote witch on her car. So it's ironic that Justine is called a witch when the real witch is hiding right underneath everyone's noses. I also wondered if she was some sort of reference to QAnon, because she feeds on children's essences to regain her health and youth, which is which is sort of a tenet of the QAnon conspiracy theory, that there are elites who drain children of adrenochrome, or whatever they say, in order to be young again. And yeah, the reason I bring that up is because it seems like it could be a reference to that, especially considering the movie seems to be very involved with modern societal issues. So yeah, it is funny and ironic that someone like that would be the real villain, if we're looking at this from the context of our world, where people really believe in people like this, even though they don't exist. So, in real life, I mean, as far as we know, I don't think there really are witches who eat children's essences out there. But yeah, she might be a reference to that. So it's meant to be ironic, darkly funny, that she is the one who is the bad person. And it might also, if that is the case, that she's a reference to QAnon, it might be telling the audience that they should look for the people who are real threats to children, instead of focusing on someone like her who could only exist in a movie, right? Then we have Alex. Alex, of course, is the only child who does not disappear from the class. What's interesting about Alex is he too becomes a weapon of Gladys's, but he is not weaponized by magic, but by emotional manipulation. If you just do these things for me, then I will leave and you will get your parents back. He ends up forced to grow up too soon by having to take care of his parents, feeding them chicken noodle soup, which of course is what a parent should be feeding their child when their child is sick or what have you. And the chicken noodle soup itself is a symbol. He is forced of him being forced to grow up too soon, and I think that might be a reference to children who face tragedy, like school shootings or what have you. They are traumatized, they're forced to deal with the horrors of the world when they're very young, they lose their innocence, etc. So I think Alex might be a representation of that. His parents get weaponized in a clear allusion to The Shining. I don't know if y'all know The Shining, but I'm sure perhaps you've at least seen the famous "Here's Johnny," where the dad in that movie who becomes possessed by ghosts, he breaks through the door and shoves his face into the hole in the door, and that happens in this movie too. So it's a clear illusion. It seems to speak to how even parents can sometimes fail their children, or at least be given over to sinister forces. And at the end of the day, Alex is the one who saves the day by using Gladys's magic against her and being resourceful, because he has to be, because he lives in this horrific world where he's in this horrific situation at his house where he has to be the adult, quote unquote, the one who stops all the horrible things. Because even though Justine and Archer do care about the kids, clearly, they still are not altogether perfect people. Archer struggled to tell his son that he loved him, for example. And Justine had her DUI, for example. So, in the end, Alex is the one who saves the day, because the film is all about how not only institutions, but adults in general, parents, teachers, etc., because they're flawed people, can also sometimes fail children. Alright, so final thoughts. The movie, I think, my take is it's overall about how institutions like schools and the police fail to protect children, how adults in general, because of their personal failings and because of corrupt societies, fail to protect children as well. It uses the backdrop of real-world school shootings without addressing the topic directly, which I thought was interesting. The title seems to be alluding to school shootings, and we also have that AR-15 that makes that seemingly random appearance. So yeah, I think it definitely is engaged with that topic, but it doesn't address it directly. It's all implicit, it's all implied. And I think maybe the reason that is because the movie wants you, the audience, to think about this topic, but it knows it's a very heavy topic, and so by not addressing it directly, it makes it more tenable, perhaps. Its message that we need to do something more to save and protect these children from gun violence. If you make it into a sort of metaphor, then it's easier for people to swallow that message, perhaps. But the ending is bittersweet and I think reflects real life too. When tragedy strikes, it often damages the kids, even if they do survive, and it damages parents as well, because Alex's parents don't really recover, at least not fully, and the kids who were trapped in the basement don't really recover fully either. So the film wants us to prevent such an ending by preventing tragedies like school shootings in the first place. Don't just do hollow gestures. Institutions and individuals should do better to make sure kids are safe, I think, is the final message of Weapons. All right. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully that led you in a good direction. But there's just so much to this movie, so many symbols that I didn't even mention, like the whales in the classroom in the background, that whale image. It seems to be, I don't even know what that means, but I think it might mean something about how whales eat krill, like how Gladys eats children, maybe. I don't know. But that just goes to show that there's so much in this movie, and I hope this helped you in writing essay 2. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time.
Please comment the answers or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. According to the video, What does the number 217 in the movie mean? 2. The video mentions 2 societal institutions the movie depicts are corrupt. What are these institutions? 3. According to the video, GLaDOS might be a reference to what conspiracy theory?